With the release of the RWBY Volume 4 soundtrack and the song Bumblebee, us Bumblebee shippers now have the most explicit and undeniable piece of evidence to point out we've ever had. Those who want to claim there's nothing to the ship at all now have a similarly uphill battle as those who still want to claim Renora was completely platonic after Boop dropped on the Volume 2 soundtrack. Despite this, a lot of people seem to be left scratching their heads. I've seen comments from people acting like this came out of nowhere or there's nothing to support it, which really isn't true. While it hasn't always been in obviously romantic ways, the bond between Yang and Blake has been repeatedly emphasized and stressed across the entirety of the series to this point. So, for this video, I figured I'd go ahead and highlight all the little moments. This is every Bumblebee moment from RWBY through Volume 4, including soundtracks. Nothing from Chibi though, since that's not canon anyway, and no metatextual stuff like the VAs voicing their support. Also, some of these admittedly don't mean much, and all of them are filtered through my opinion. But all taken together, I think it adds up to something. Here we go. Before we even meet the characters, the two of them are together associated with Beauty and the Beast, a romantic fairy tale, in the lyrics of Red Like Roses Part 1. Yang doesn't hesitate to cheerfully initiate first contact with Blake immediately after RWBY points her out.
I like your
Yang
belt.
compliments Blake's attire, then doubles down.
It goes great with your pajamas.
What you can see to be Blake's shadow if you slow down or pause is seen lurking around Yang in the forest before she shows herself to assist in the fight against the Ursas. This suggests that Blake deliberately chose Yang for her partner after observing her. Yang just seems to stare at Blake with interest for a spare second or two before she follows after her to the temple.
How about a cute little pony?
Yang's silly pony line draws a nice smile from Blake, who seems genuinely amused. The two then share smiles after commenting on the ease they're having with the trial.
Difficult to find.
Blake has already formed enough of a connection with or interest in Yang to slow down and question her when she stops to observe RWBY. She then flashes a fond smile in seeing the pride Yang has in her sister. The next day, Blake is suddenly in sync with RWBY and Yang after not having much patience with them in their first meeting. A day spent mostly with Yang really seems to have changed her tune completely.
It must be hard to be a faunus.
Yang expresses empathy for the faunus immediately without even knowing Blake is one, and Blake shoots her a meaningful look in response. While the rest of Team RWBY is gathering sap in their jars, Blake is just kinda kneeling there without a jar, staring right at Yang with a interesting look on her face. Yang is very firm with Weiss after Blake runs away, matter-of-factly expressing concern to make sure Blake is safe.
Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. Either way, she's missing, and we need to find her.
A desire to put the whole matter in proper context.
Weiss, I think we should hear her side of the story before we jump to any conclusions.
And finally, frustration with Weiss for how she is acting.
You really don't care if we find her, do you?
Now, this one really veers into the subjective, so please bear with me, but in my opinion, the Volume 1 credits song Wings makes the most sense as a song from Yang to Blake. The lyrics make it clear that it is sung to Blake, and it's Casey rather than Jeff singing it, which suggests it's from a female character's perspective. And no one else really makes as much sense due to both the context and the feel of the song, which is very much comforting and assuring, the exact role Yang takes towards Blake starting in Volume 2. Given her Bronwyn heritage, the bird and wing metaphors also make more sense from her than anyone else. Note that while the song is not a love song, it is still emotionally potent, and the singer does call Blake baby. Yang notices Blake looking troubled, focusing intently on her notebook, and cheerfully tries to get her to open up about it, but doesn't force the situation once Blake dodges. Blake makes some interesting faces when Yang falls through the ceiling, seemingly very concerned and alarmed, then amused by the silliness. Yang enthusiastically agrees with the plan to investigate the White Fang and Torchwick, and has this to say about why she's in.
I love it when you're feisty.
For a long time I thought this line was directed to her sister after her overly enthusiastic spiel, but she clearly points in Blake's direction, and Blake smiles in response, suggesting she is referring instead to the passionate case Blake made before that, and that feisty Blake is what she loves to see. Blake calls out with concern for Yang when the Paladin attacks her, despite the presence of her aura and the fact that after a semester, Blake should know well her partner's toughness. Yang alone is able to formulate a plan to get Blake to go to the dance, one she expresses utter confidence in.
Trust me, Blake will be at the dance tomorrow.
Considering what the plan is, she is putting absolute faith in the emotional connection the two of them share. Yang gets a real kick out of teasing Blake in silly ways, as we see with the laser pointer scene. Yang unloads on Blake, bearing open her soul when it comes to her history, failings, and abandonment issues. Yang is not the sort to talk about this stuff naturally, and she is never quite this open with anyone else. Yang is so firm with Blake, determined to do whatever it takes to make her see that she is being foolish. Her sheer conviction is strong enough to get her eyes to change to red. and hugging Blake tight is enough to get them to change back.
Please, get some rest. Not just for you, but for the people you care about.
Yang, speaking of the people Blake cares about while hugging Blake, calls particular interest to Yang herself, especially with the tone with which the line is said. With this line and the next one, it's almost like Yang is suggesting Blake is into her and trying to get her to act on it. And the big one.
And if you feel like coming out tomorrow, I'll save you a dance.
Yang flirts with Blake while asking her for a dance. Seriously. The wink on its own is flirty enough, but there's also the stealth pun in using the phrase coming out when asking another girl to dance with her. Something that can't be written off given Yang's habit of lacing her dialogue with puns inherited from her voice actor. The really earnest way the line is read by said voice actor also makes this all really hard to dismiss as just joking around. This, simply put, does not sound anything like Yang when she's being irreverent. It carries too much weight. Yang's plan actually works. Their connection and Yang's conviction pulls Blake out of her single-minded obsession. She decides to go to the dance and just generally eases up after this, clearly affected. Yang says she'll save Blake a dance, but by the time Blake gets to Sun, this has changed to her first dance, something Yang notably did not specify. Then they actually share their dance and clearly enjoy it. When Blake then dances with Sun, she does so for less than 10 seconds before looking back in Yang's direction.
I told you she would come.
Yang seems really proud of how she got Blake to come. Yang told Blake she would save her a dance, but Blake is the only person Yang has ever shown dancing with. When Weiss expresses doubt in her convictions following Oobleck's interrogation, Yang follows this by expressing her own confusion. After Blake joins in, however, Yang seems to do a sudden 180 and suggests it doesn't matter and they'll be fine.
We know why we're here.
After Blake again expresses doubt in herself and her capability to deal with what she has ahead of her, Yang again tries to comfort and assure her.
I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're not one to back down from a challenge, Blake.
And the line reading this time is softened in an oddly suggestive way, while the scene is shot at an angle that really emphasizes Yang's chest.
At least you two have something that drives you.
Even when Yang gets back around to expressing her own confusions, she frames it in a way that seems designed to make Blake feel better about herself following her outburst. When Yang wins her fight against Mercury, Blake calls out to her and gives her a full-on standing ovation, something not even RWBY does. The idea of not having Blake's trust breaks Yang. Her eyes go cold and she legit cries. Blake's opinion means that much to her, that her other two teammates are willing to trust her implicitly and stand up for her in spite of what they physically saw is insignificant.
Blake?
The way she says Blake's name is also worth noting, carrying not just obvious hurt, but a sense of betrayal. Blake correlates Yang with Adam, an apparent former romantic partner. That seeing Yang hurt someone would evoke feelings so similar to seeing Adam change suggests how deeply she feels for Yang. Though distressed and unsure what to think, Yang's words and tears are enough to get Blake to tentatively believe her partner over her own eyes despite her trust issues. It's almost like she refutes her own arguments right as she gives them, just because she wants to come back around to being on Yang's side.
She's doing the best she can.
Despite what just happened, once Blake leaves the room, she immediately expresses consideration for Yang. When the battle for Beacon starts, Blake prioritizes calling and checking in on Yang over joining the fight. Throughout the conversation, their worry for each other's safety is stressed multiple times.
Yang! I gotta go. Be careful. RWBY?
Though the fact that Weiss is visibly exhausted and they have a better idea as to where Blake is surely factored into the decision, Yang still chooses chasing after Blake over tracking down her missing sister. Adam says that it'll destroy everything that Blake loves, then immediately Yang shows up, and after seeing Blake's horrified face, he adds starting with her. Unless she has a history of bisexuality that he knows about and he can discern that she is in love with Yang by her reaction, which admittedly is a possibility, it's doubtful he means to suggest romantic love with this line, but this is still the ship being deliberately invoked by the writers. The thought of what might come next for Yang fills Blake with obvious horror. Even after getting stabbed, she still clearly is more focused on wanting Yang to stay away and keep safe. Seeing Blake stabbed kicks off a fury in Yang like none we have ever seen from her.
Get away from her!
The way she delivers the line is raw and intense. Tears are in her eyes if you look at some frames. Her passion is so blinding she leaps ahead recklessly to try and save Blake, leaving herself open to attack. Blake, though wounded, forces herself back up and into action to save Yang from Adam before he can finish her off. She manages to use her semblance and get away successfully while carrying another person despite her injury. Considering how she seemed unable to move both before and after this burst of adrenaline, she is definitely pushing herself past her limits just to accomplish this. Blake clings to Yang's hand as she apologizes profusely and cries, sounding utterly broken by what has happened. She doesn't let go of Yang's hand for the duration of the scene. Yang has been gruesomely maimed. Her home for the past year has been destroyed. 2 of her friends have died, 1 cruelly murdered. Another friend has been forcibly abducted against her will by her controlling father she's made it clear she despises. Blake leaving is what gets the emotional dam to break for her, though. It gets the biggest reaction by far, suggesting it to be the thing that hurts her the most in the moment. This emotional outcry over Blake specifically is, in my opinion, what makes it the most obvious that Yang's feelings for her do not stop at friendship. The line reading for her "I don't care" when it comes to Blake, and the accompanying animation more suggests that she cares more than anything. Seriously, anyone who thinks she's just mad at Blake is blind. This is plainly heartbreak over her not being there. In the Volume 4 intro, we see Blake with her parents and son. She then looks away from them all in the direction of the transition as the scene changes to Yang. Immediately after a scene featuring Blake, we cut to Yang, and the first thing she does is stare thoughtfully at a stack of books, something associated with Blake from her first appearance. If the only implication is that she considers reading but then decides to watch TV instead, this would not be worth including. And when we return from the Yang scenes back to Blake, the first thing we see her do is stare at a passing couple linking hands with an ambiguous sort of longing evident in her reaction. Considering the reaction she gives Sun when he shows himself, and how she treats him throughout most of the volume, I find it hard to believe he is who she is thinking about in this moment.
Every day I think about them. RWBY, Weiss, Yang. They were my friends. I love them like I never thought I could love anybody.
Blake mentions Yang by name, then talks about loving her friends like she's never loved anyone else. Granted, she mentions RWBY and Weiss too, but when she says Yang's name, her voice kind of cracks in a way that it doesn't for anyone else. She also says that she hopes that they hate her for what she did, and while she's speaking of all her friends here, considering the context of the situation, it's pretty clear that she's mostly thinking of Yang, the one who was hurt for her, and loathes herself for how she has betrayed her.
But I'd do it all again if I'm in protecting you. And I can promise Yang would say the same.
Sun makes a romantically charged statement about protecting Blake, then immediately concludes that Yang would for sure say the same thing. Like the Adam scene, it's doubtful, perhaps even more so here, that Sun means to suggest anything between the two with this, and it does make sense given Yang was hurt for Blake just as he was. But bringing up Yang immediately after having one of the weightier Black Sun lines is still the ship, or at least the shipping war, being deliberately invoked by the writers. In the Volume 4 credits song, Armed and Ready, this line is included. This song is from Yang's perspective, and the beginning of it, where this line is located, illustrates her having flashes back to her losing her arm. In context of the song, this can only be about Blake, and it is super romantically charged. And finally, Bumblebee. The song is unabashedly romantic and even suggestive, more than probably any other song from the soundtracks, and it is clearly a song from one female to another. The most meaningful lyrics within it describe a typically dark and gloomy girl who finds comfort and happiness in the form of a sunny, upbeat girl whom she is deeply enamored with. This can be taken to suggest that Blake is very much in love with Yang. Some have argued that other parts of the song might be from Yang's point of view towards Blake, thus illustrating it to be mutual, but at least in my view, none of the other lyrics quite necessitate being sung by Yang in the same way, even if they very well might be given the use of some wordplay throughout. And there we have it. That's every moment that even slightly says Bumblebee to me. Let me know what you thought, if I missed anything, or just what your personal favorite Bumblebee moments have been. And while you do that, I think I'm gonna go listen to the song Bumblebee a couple dozen more times. See you next time.